Good morning, students. In this episode, we are going to be talking about stress management. Nothing can be more omnipresent than stress under the times that we find ourselves in. Now, if you would look around, you would find that people react to stress in a very different manner. While some get overwhelmed and are under a lot of pressure, there are others who make the most of the time that is probably on their hand. Why do we differ in our ability to manage stress? What is so unique about stress? And to actually begin with, what is stress? I have two rubber bands in front of me where one is a yellow one and one is a red one. What you would see here is that there are inherent stretchability aspects of every rubber band that we have. For example, this is a poor quality rubber band while this is a better quality rubber band. But being a poor quality rubber band does not mean that it cannot be stretched or that it would break too soon. If you wrap it up on a paper, it would probably last you a lifetime. While if you talk about the good quality rubber bands, it could be stretched to a much greater degree, however, not endlessly. So, when we talk about ourselves, in some strange ways, we too are also like rubber bands, where some of us can actually be stretched to just a certain degree, after which we snap quite like this rubber band, while some others can actually be stretched to a much greater degree, but we do not crumble under the pressure or we do not break. Having talked about this particular example, let me tell you that it is basically two factors that impact stress: our own inherent stretchability and the kind of forces that impact us from the environment. Some of us have an unusually unfair amount of stress in our life. We would probably have a physical problem. We would probably have parents to take care of. We might even have financial problems. But let me tell you that it is a very manageable aspect. And in a moment, I'm going to tell you that not everything is wrong about stress. Let me bring you to another very important aspect of our country, which is the focus on national mental health. The reason why I'm mentioning mental health is because excessive stress is probably the primary contributor to what we call as mental ailments, psychological disorders, or our inability to handle pressures. Now, let me give you some statistics here. These statistics come from the president while he was at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences in Bangalore. 13.6% of our population suffers from psychological disorders, and approximately 5% of people are so severely under the grip of a psychological disorder that they require treatment and hospitalization. Before we come on to the details related to stress, let me give you some statistics on mental health in our country. These statistics come from our president while he was at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences in Bangalore. According to the statistics that he quoted, 13.6% of our population has a psychological disorder, and approximately 5% of people have a disorder that is serious enough to require medication as well as hospitalization. Well, how did it all start? When did it really start? Well, the first sign that we would see is stress. So we would say that stress is actually the halfway station to many such psychological disorders. And how many people do we have to take care of these disorders that are so prevalent in our country? Just about 5,000 psychiatrists and just about 2,000 clinical psychologists are present in the entire country to manage the psychological health of people who suffer under these consequences. Now, when we talk about such few numbers, we are talking about inaccessibility. So what I'm looking at is you. Whether you have psychology or you don't, let us look at this particular class as something where you would be my advocates to promote what is considered to be good mental health. Having talked about that, let me also tell you that 14.5 million people in the world actually suffer from something which is related to stress and psychological disorders. So we are not alone. It is just the way things are unfolding in front of us. It is no surprise that even a college like BSS has trained its psychology as well as social work students into actually manning telephone lines to relieve the stress of people who are admitted at Hamidia Hospital and to talk to their relatives so that they also feel better about managing stress. This is something which was the out of the classroom kind of an experience for our students. Let's not forget that just about a fortnight back, there is a helpline that is launched by the Government of India, which is called as Kiran. Let's look at it as a ray of hope, which is available all 24 hours and in 13 languages all across the country. So whether you are in the north, south, east or west of the country, you will find that some language that you are familiar with is the language in which the psychologist really responds to you. Now, all these measures are actually taken to combat stress, to fight stress. So what exactly is stress? When we talk about stress, a very simple definition that we can think about is that whenever we feel that our abilities and the expectations that society has, that people has from us are different, when there is a mismatch between what we perceive to be what we can do and what others expect us to do, that mismatch is exactly, in very simple language, called as stress. Now, as I said that I'm also going to be highlighting the fact that stress need not always be detrimental. It can actually be one of those things that can be of great help and value to you. I would like you to look at that one incident that you are particularly proud of as an achievement in your life, right? So if you have imagined, maybe it was a play that you acted in, maybe it was a stage performance that you made, or maybe it was an interview that you might have faced at some stage, right? And you were extremely proud of how you did that. Just imagine the few minutes before you came onto the stage or entered the room in which the interview was to be conducted. There must have been a lot of stress. But had you just said no to the interview, or had you said no to the invitation by a teacher to actually participate in a play or a song, you would not have looked at it as something that now counts as an achievement and that you are reasonably proud of. So what am I trying to tell you? What I am trying to tell you here is that stress and performance actually go hand in hand up to a certain point, which means that if there is stress in your life, it actually brings out your best and you might reach your optimum through stress in very clear ways. Look at the examination scenario. Just before the examination, you would probably be meeting up teachers, asking them to clarify doubts. You would probably be asking your friends to help you out. You may probably be sitting up late in the night or setting the alarm to get up really early in the morning. What does that translate into? It translates into better performance while you attempt that particular paper. Had it not been stress, you would have found that your ability may never have been reached the way it is while you undergo a certain degree of stress. Yes, it cannot go on endlessly. There comes a point when the stress might be increasing, but the performance is not, and therefore you are set to reach a plateau, right? After which it starts to go down and decline, and that is where we find sleeplessness, irritability, or at a later stage, several psychological disorders that might actually impact you. So, When we are talking about stress and stress management, one of those things that might come to your mind is, as a young person, you might be reading a lot about some of these suggestions that keep cropping up everywhere about watching a comedy show, about listening to songs, about gardening, and certain other things that can be done in order to alleviate stress or reduce stress. While I'm not against any of these suggestions, let me tell you what is the psychological way out of this particular condition. There are only two ways in which stress can be managed. Either you bring about a change in how the environment unfolds in front of you, or you bring about a change in your own inherent abilities. There is no third way of managing stress, and all that you read about it actually gets subsumed into these two areas. So, while we are talking about stress management, the first thing that I'm going to be talking about is bringing about a change in the environment. How do you bring about a change in the environment? And am I talking about sitting in an air-conditioned room or maybe having facilities around you? Absolutely no. I am talking about the fact that people's reaction to you, the kind of things that you experience and face, should actually be worked upon. And that is where you would be able to manage stress. So within that parameter, the first thing that I must emphasize you, and I'm so glad that there are girls also listening to it, because this is something which is specifically of use to the girl students, of course to be used by boys as well. And that is assertiveness. Your ability to stand up for yourself, your ability to take charge of your views and express it. Of course, it does not mean that if you express your views, it would be accepted by people or that it would be sort of agreed upon by other people. No. What I'm trying to say here is, if you don't stand up for yourself, no one will. Recall an incident about people who end up committing suicide. What is the reaction that other people display? They would usually say, "Why didn't he talk to me? He could have asked me. I would have helped him," right? That is exactly what I'm talking about. Please express yourself. Please say things. Do not bottle up things within you, because at a very inopportune time and in a very intense manner, it might actually explode right in front of you. So, when we talk about assertiveness, most people confuse it with aggressiveness. While assertiveness is about standing up for yourself, aggressiveness is all about having power over other people. That is an absolute no-no, but speaking up for yourself is the point that I'm trying to make here. Yet another thing in the whole sector of how the environment should unfold differently is the fact that withdraw if necessary. There are things that we choose, but later on we realize it is something that probably cannot be done by us, right? And therefore, withdrawal is probably the only way of going about it. If you would know about Mount Everest, you would be surprised to know that out of every 10 teams that go right up on the mountain top, there are 90 teams that never make it, right? And good that they never make it. That is because it does not mean that they do not have the resources. It also does not mean that they do not have the courage to go up there. It just means that they have taken the right decision considering the weather conditions, maybe considering an accident. So withdrawal is probably the right way that at least at some point of time one might really be in a position to climb Mount Everest one more time. So whenever it is necessary, just make sure that you do not look at withdrawal as negatively as most people perceive it to be. Yet another thing is related to compromise. There are times when we have to compromise. For example, I keep hearing from my students that they attempt a certain entrance examination year after year and do not make it even after 3, 4 or at times even 5 attempts. For example, if you are trying to get into a medical college and you have been rejected once or twice, well, compromise would mean if you like those conditions under which the hospital functions, you can be there through other channels as well. For example, look at genetics, look at limnology, look at pathology, look at even clinical psychology and psychiatric social work. These are ways by which you would probably gain the satisfaction of being in a hospital-like condition while not actually being there as a doctor. So, there are times when the right strategy is to compromise when it is appropriate. I'm not talking about withdrawal and compromise on a regular basis, but there definitely would be times when it is required in order to manage stress. The next thing that I talked about is in some clear ways bringing about a change in your own abilities, in the way you function. So, the first thing in that I must share with you is that stress is almost like, a muscle that we have in our body, where while you lift weights, you would find that the muscles start to develop, right? If you lift very heavy weights from day one, you'd probably run the risk of a sprain or maybe even a fracture. So, in clear ways, our ability to withstand stress is something that we need to inculcate, that we need to bring about, and that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make. That if you get stressed under circumstances today, that does not mean that you would be stressed 10 years from now under those circumstances or even longer. Only if you work on your abilities to manage stress. How? Maybe through proper time management, maybe through conflict resolution, maybe through things like mindfulness. Do some reading about it and you will find that your ability to withstand expands in very, very clear ways. The last thing that I have for you today is about social skills. When I talk about social skills, we are not talking about our ability to run a conversation or to use a language effectively. No, I'm talking about your ability to build up meaningful relationships with people. I completely understand that there are times when we would be required to maintain a formal relationship with people, something that would be absolutely on the hi, hello, good morning basis, and that's a requirement, no questions asked. But there should always be people with whom you can bear out your heart, where you can express, where you can talk without the fear of being judged by them. And while you do that, do you know that you would also in some ways allow that other person to express the same at some point of time. When we do something like that, do not forget that some meaningful suggestions about how to manage a stressful event might actually come from that other person. Let me give you this example, which I strongly believe in. The ones of you who might have ever been to a circus as young children might have seen the trapeze act in the circus, where on a swing people would jump from one swing to the other and change places with other people. Have you ever seen people doing a trapeze art without the network or without the net just a few feet above the ground? Never. No trapeze artist would ever run the risk of doing a trapeze act without the net. Why? That is because you may have the caliber, you may have the competence, you may have the ability, but there could be a technical fault that can actually get you to trip and come down crashing onto the ground, right? In order to prevent that, there is this net which would hold you and prevent you from falling down. in some clear ways, the network of people does exactly the same thing. While life throws something unpleasant at you, you will find that the people who support you, the people who are close to you, would be like the safety net which would hold you from falling down on the ground and actually breaking up, right? So, what I was talking about was either bringing about a change in the environment or bringing about a change in yourself. Here were ways by which you can manage stress really well. So what do I say at the end? I'm sure you must have seen the violin as a musical instrument. And if you have been a keen observer of how the violin is actually tuned by a maestro, you would find that that person would take several minutes to tune the violin so that just the right notes come out of it, right? In some clear ways, stress is also like that. For example, if you leave the wires of the violin loose, then a very unpleasant sound might come out of it. If you tighten it a lot, then a very shrill sound might come out of it. So, when we are talking about stress, in some ways, very little stress also does not do us any good. So, in some ways, stress absolutely should be invited so that it teaches you what do you have within yourself which is so special. What is it that you really need to work upon? What is it that would bring you up and in some clear ways hone your talents? If you tighten it a lot, if there's a lot of stress in your life, again you run the risk of breaking or falling a prey to psychological disorder. But if it is beautifully tuned, what would come out of it would be pure melody. So in order to bring about this melody on the path of life that you walk, please make sure that you do not invite too much of stress and keep yourself away from too little of it either. Lots of good wishes for happiness, health in your life.